Would you ever vote for Klaus Schwab? That's the question to ask, since Mark Carney is a prominent supporter of Schwab's World Economic Forum and Schwab's books. This video looks at ideas from Schwab's Great Reset book that voters need to know, while the Fourth Industrial Revolution and Stakeholder Capitalism are covered in separate videos. You won't get this information anywhere else. As you'll see, many reporters have been lying to you about Schwab for years, and they haven't even read the books. First up, don't be scared off by the word COVID. The title of COVID-19, The Great Reset, is a marketing gimmick, since it doesn't have much to do with the sniffles. But that's what was on the mind of people in July 2020 when the book came out. Schwab describes the book as ideas about what the post-pandemic world might and perhaps should look like. Schwab and co-author Terry Malloret are economists with no medical expertise, so what little they say about the disease is laughable. They claim the virus resulted from deforestation due to climate change because pangolins and bats were forced to live closer to humans. Of course, rising levels of CO2 in the atmosphere have helped forests expand, and NASA reported that the greening has been so extensive they can see it from outer space. And later, financial records revealed that the US government actually funded the bat coronavirus experiments at the Wuhan lab. My video, How Bad is the Great Reset book, outlines many of the mistakes, contradictions, and bizarre tangents the book takes. And then there's top 10 outrageous Great Reset quotes. Some reporters who never read the book claim that the Great Reset was an economic plan to emerge from the recession, but that's not in the book. The recession was the result of lockdowns, and would end when lockdowns ended. Strangely, the book predicted the pandemic would be followed by a period of low inflation, low interest rates, high unemployment rates, and that most post-pandemic people would be reluctant to spend money, and rich people wouldn't flaunt their wealth. Spectacularly wrong on all counts. In fact, voters need to know that the World Economic Forum actually wants to shrink the economy, presumably for climate change. Schwab talks about the tyranny of GDP growth, and says the goal is really degrowth, which he defines as the equitable downsizing of the economy, leading to a future where we can live better with less. That means a lower standard of living. This idea can be seen in Mark Carney's housing plan. It concentrates on small modular homes, rentals with no parking spaces. It follows the idea of the WEF video. You will owe nothing and be happy. Though Carney's Brookfield buddies will still own the modular group construction company that might get that $25 billion contract. Poilievre's housing policy looks more like the houses we have today that people can aspire to own. Globalism is a major theme of the Great Reset. Schwab says the world is moving away from globalism and laments a perceived lack of trust of global institutions and a rise of new nationalist parties in Europe. He chides people who opposed open borders, even during the pandemic. He favors global government, UN, World Bank, WHO, and no surprise that you saw him at the World Government Summit. Put bluntly, we live in a world in which nobody is really in charge. He was referring to lockdown measures. He was in favor of all of them and lamented that there weren't more, since national governments decided pandemic response rather than a centralized system that could have imposed restrictions on all countries simultaneously. He called for more funding and powers for the World Health Organization, and describing their $4.2 billion annual budget as minuscule. And they don't even do house calls. After the book was published, WEF was a big supporter of vaccine passports and digital medical libraries to track people's medical info around the world. Further, WEF has been a major cheerleader for the UN's proposed pandemic treaty, whereby UN members would agree to give the WHO control over response to future pandemics or medical emergencies. And no, WHO Chief Tedros says climate change is a health crisis. Sheesh. Of course, the downside of handing over control to the WHO should be obvious, especially to people who had issues with the WHO last time. It adds another expensive layer of bureaucracy to healthcare, and unlike your own health minister, you could never vote them out if you don't like them. I remind you that Bill Gates, through his foundations, is the largest donor to the WHO, and at times he seemed to be the main spokesman for them. Now remember this?
Normalcy only returns when we've largely vaccinated the entire global population.
And it turns out he owned piles of shares of the vaccine companies. This report said he made a $500 million profit, finally selling just before announcing that the vaccines don't stop you from getting the disease or spreading it. Globalism could result in people like Bill Gates controlling aspects of Canada's healthcare. Enjoy! The globalism debate is currently playing out in the election. Carney, the globalist with 3 passports, says bilateral trade relations with the US are dead forever. After elected Liberal leader, his first action was to go to the UK and France for trade talks, coming home to say Canada might join the EU. And as Europe is committed to net zero, Canada would have to have substantial prices on carbon to join their club. Poilievre's Canada First, or nationalist if you wish, approach is to build pipelines so Eastern Canada could have access to Western oil without the need for international trade, and eliminating GST and carbon taxes to make Canadian businesses more cost competitive versus foreign competitors, regardless of the trading bloc. Joining the EU would only force Canadian businesses to adapt to a new series of restrictions and regulations made to run the other 29 countries of the group. Another globalist issue is immigration. As stated, Schwab promotes open borders. One of Carney's top advisors is Mark Wiseman, chair of the Century Initiative that wants massive immigration in Canada to boost the population from 40 million to 100 million. This is meant for the benefit of the immigrants, not Canada, as it would stretch existing infrastructure beyond imagination. Poilievre's more nationalist approach is to reduce immigration until housing pressures subside, and immigration levels should be set to help existing Canadians rather than burden them. And the Liberal policy of high immigration makes no sense if you claim to be cutting carbon to fix the weather. More people, more carbon. Most immigrants come from countries with per capita emissions of less than 1 or 2 tons, compared to 15 for Canada. Then you have to chop down the forests for housing developments, and the steel and cement to build homes require huge emissions. In the last third of the book, Schwab's hope is that people have a psychological reset from being united and vigilant against the pandemic to being united and vigilant against climate change. Schwab tries to convince the reader that the pandemic was positive. For example, lockdowns gave us the gift of more time. Yes, he wrote that in the book. Time to think, to reimagine the world, and reset the economy against carbon. In some speeches, Schwab says, reset capitalism. A Canadian should be shocked at how radical a reset could be. The COVID-19 crisis cannot go to waste. He wrote, soon adding, the European Green Deal launched by the European Commission is a massive endeavor and the most tangible manifestation yet of public authorities deciding not to let the COVID-19 crisis go to waste. The European Green Deal that Schwab praises is a series of policies aimed at reducing GHG emissions, notably limits on livestock, with Ireland and France expected to make massive culls of cattle herds, limits on fertilizer, which would drastically reduce food production and farmers' incomes, and most famously, the plan to expropriate a third of the farmland in the Netherlands, booting people off the land the families had farmed for centuries, kicking off years of Dutch farm protests, and there were massive farm protests throughout Europe in 2023. It's puzzling that Schwab and his favorite politicians would target food production for emissions. Like, you think that'd be the last thing to go, as it's essential for human life. And the farmers' plants grow by photosynthesis, which involves absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. Further, the emission cuts were aimed at the average working class families, while the Dutch steel company Tata and the oil giant Royal Dutch Shell weren't asked to share the burden. And the agricultural cuts don't really cut emissions. And people have to eat. So somewhere in the world, some other farmers are going to have to clear land somewhere else, like the Amazon rainforest, to make up the difference. Unless your goal really is to starve people, which was the theme of my satirical video, How to Become an Evil Supervillain. The Green Deal does seem to promote degrowth. The Netherlands was the world's second biggest food exporter, bringing lots of money into the country's economy. Money the government actually needs to run the schools and hospitals. Another part of Schwab reimagining the economy is hiring and investing based on ESG. That's environmental, social, and governance. Social being diversity, equity, and inclusion. The pandemic leaves no doubt in boardrooms that the absence of ESG considerations has the potential to destroy substantial value and threaten the viability of a business. This didn't age well, Within a few years, there was the Bud Light fiasco, where the DEI spokesman alienated the customer base, costing the brand billions. The collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank, which made too many loans to risky but trendy net zero businesses. And the OceanGate submarine disaster, where people died because a diversity-oriented manager didn't want to hire a 50-year-old white guy with military experience. We'll come back to ESG later with stakeholder capitalism. COVID-19, the Great Reset, came out in July 2020, and in November 2020, Justin Trudeau went viral when this video came out.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset. This is our chance to accelerate our pre-pandemic efforts to reimagine economic systems that actually address global challenges like extreme poverty, inequality, and climate change.
Imagine losing a loved one to COVID. Then you watch Trudeau say he's using the disease to exploit a political opportunity. It created a buzz. And that's when the story twisted in a way that might change your perception of reality. Nearly all the major news outlets started publishing stories that anyone saying anything negative about Trudeau or the World Economic Forum was a conspiracy theorist, spreading the baseless Great Reset conspiracy theory, without even explaining to the audience once that the Great Reset was a book written by Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. Like the book never existed. So-called news sources from all over the world, CBC, BBC, NPR, all with multi-million-dollar budgets, apparently unaware of a book I could read from the public library. Total gaslighting! I'll show you some examples in a moment. I found so many examples I made videos analyzing the stories, eventually making an 8-video compilation that could have been twice that size. CBC, CTV, Global, Toronto Star, and the Globe and Mail all had stories about the Great Reset conspiracy theory, where they offered readers no clue that the Great Reset was a book with controversial opinions. You can't trust these sources for election news. The only big Canadian sources that didn't appear to have these fake reset stories were The Sun and National Post. Outside Canada, BBC, The Guardian, NPR, CNN, and ABC, and others all had fake conspiracy stories, as if they were all using the same editorial staff, or they wrote articles with AI that copied the same bogus sources. Now, you've already seen how Trudeau's reset speech was nearly word for word from Schwab's book. But here's some other evidence the media should have known.
Names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on, that we penetrate the cabinets. Today I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now.
This clip was about 5 years old when Conservative MP Colin Carey quoted the clip in Parliament and asked which ministers supported the WEF.
Klaus Schwab is the head of the World Economic Forum, and he bragged how his subversive WEF, World Economic Forum, has, quoted, infiltrated governments around the world. He said that his organization had penetrated more than half of Canada's cabinet. And I was wondering, in the interest of transparency, could the member please name which cabinet ministers are on board with the WEF's agenda? My concern is the deputy...
Order.
Speaker Anthony Rota, yes, the same guy who honored the German SS soldier in Parliament, faked an audio problem and the question was never answered.
The audio is really, really bad, and the video is really, really bad as well.
Then the CBC reported that Carey was a conspiracy theorist for asking the question. And a hilarious lack of self-awareness in the headline. Canada has bigger issues to discuss than conspiracy theories, so Canada's national broadcaster discusses conspiracy theories, even if it has to invent the conspiracy theories itself. But I digress. At the time Trudeau made his reset video, his connection to Schwab was well known. His deputy minister, Chrystia Freeland, was on the board of trustees of the WEF, and his minority government was propped up by Jagmeet Singh, honored on the WEF website as a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, class of 2018. So back to Trudeau's reset speech. Global News posted this: "Playing with fire, how politicians can perpetuate baseless conspiracy theories," by Rachel Gilmore. She doesn't know that The Great Reset is a book by Klaus Schwab, saying it's only something mentioned in a WEF press release about a future meeting. So she accuses Pierre Poilievre of being a conspiracy theorist with a 12-page rant. Poilievre responds by giving her the links, proving that what he was saying about the WEF came right from their website. Even after including Pierre's tweet in her article, she doubles down, accusing him of using the language of the conspiracy theory, and finding others who also haven't read the book to accuse Poilievre of disinformation. The danger lies in the misinterpretation of some of these big words, and that Pierre is using the term "the Great Reset" as a catchphrase to instigate and scare people. All the while it's the title of a book! So Global News isn't just biased, it's gaslighting propaganda. And CTV News hired the same Rachel Gilmore to do fact-checking for the election. CTV News, also gaslighting propaganda. And I found Rachel Gilmore's article through cbc.ca. CBC's reaction to Trudeau's speech was this article: "The Great Reset reads like a globalist plot with some plot holes." So eager were they to push the narrative that the Great Reset was a conspiracy invented by conservatives rather than a bad book by Schwab, that they put hyperlinks in the article, two of which link to the Gilmore travesty and another to a similar fake Great Reset article by the BBC. So CBC and BBC are also gaslighting propaganda. In this article, the CBC accused Poilievre of brushing up with the conspiracy theorists for using the same terminology as Trudeau, never once telling us who these alleged conspiracy theorists are, or quoting even one of them, or even one complete sentence from Poilievre. Aaron Wary says Klaus Schwab called for a Great Reset in June, as if it were from a random speech, but that was actually Schwab's book launch. And Wary leaves Great Reset in lowercase letters, giving the reader no clue that the Great Reset is a book title. And here's another CBC article calling the Great Reset a conspiracy theory without mentioning Schwab's book. This photo was taken at a massive anti-lockdown march in Montreal. Here are photos of the event that weren't included in the article. So as thousands march, they take a photo with the only sign saying the Great Reset. Don't ask this guy what a sign means, and label the entire crowd as Great Reset conspiracy theorists, when most of them have probably never heard of the Great Reset and were only marching because lockdowns were keeping their kids out of school, canceling cancer screenings, real stuff like that. The CBC hates your guts. And the photo had nothing to do with the rest of the article. It had been used earlier in this article. Senators overwhelmed by emails, calls pushing conspiracy theories about basic income legislation. Without showing a single email, the CBC labels as conspiracy theorists anyone who criticized Trudeau's plan to study universal basic income. Maybe it was just a bad idea. And again, the article has nothing to do with people protesting lockdowns. Oh wait, there's more. Here's another article. Digital mercenaries. MPs describe their clashes with disinformation campaigns, with more references to the Great Reset conspiracy theory, without mentioning Schwab's books, and giving no evidence of an actual campaign. In fact, they illustrate digital mercenaries by showing people with handmade signs, and somehow try to relate them to Russian disinformation and an incident at a Washington pizzeria. Clearly, it's the CBC that's inventing conspiracy theories and spreading misinformation. So now you understand another election issue. Poilievre wants to defund the CBC, and Carney wants to increase government subsidies to the CBC to promote more of the same. No wonder. And Trudeau's policies really did reimagine the economy, hiring tens of thousands of bureaucrats to run expensive new programs, resulting in previously unimaginable debt levels, massive increases in immigration levels, but not imagining the housing shortages and inflation that would result, and a supercharged obsession with climate change, blocking energy projects, banning new pipelines with Bill C-69, methane limits that will cripple oil and gas and agricultural businesses when they take effect, tens of billions of dollars in subsidies to foreign multinationals for car batteries, and of course the $1 billion Sustainable Development Technology Canada fiasco, where the people running the program awarded grants to their own companies, At least 90 conflicts of interest, including Cycle Canada, which received over $100 million, while the federal minister of climate change was still an important shareholder and consultant. Welcome to the Great Reset. But blurf! Carney isn't Trudeau. No, he's worse. He's forever talking about reimagining the economy.
What we need to do is fundamentally reimagine our economy.
He wants to inject weather issues into every human transaction.
We need to ultimately get to a point where every financial decision is taking climate change into account.
He wrote a book where he expresses admiration for Karl Marx and says Canada should keep its oil and gas in the ground. Hey Alberta, good luck paying for your health care. Please click notifications so you won't miss the next in the series, Stakeholder Capitalism.